The anabarically charged air in Gear Spring Square crackled with the rhythmic huff of steam vents and the occasional sproing in the gears of an overworked assist bot. At precisely 11 minutes past 11, the grand clock tower's 11:11 chime chimed out. The pinafored children of every school dutifully huzzared the noble city engineers, and in the regulated bustle of the gilded teapot, Lord Percival Tattershaw III collapsed face first into the second half of his afternoon trifle. The patrons of the Gilded Teapot gasped and fluttered in a most civilised manner. A lady fainted delicately into the arms of a startled automaton waiter who calculated the appropriate reaction by processing historical, social and psychological inputs before settling on patting the upper left quadrant of her back in a regular, soothing jazz rhythm. Across the room, Inspectress Theodora Clankworthy sighed and closed her pocket watch. Blasted timing, she muttered, having just reached the exactly optimum second to take her first sip of a perfectly brewed cup of Lady Grey and a slice of spiced batberry tart. The maitre d', human and underlevel mushroom pale beneath his brass-rimmed monocle and nouveau riche facial bronzer, tottered forward. "Madam Inspectress, I do believe Lord Tattershaw has suddenly and mysteriously expired." "Yes," sighed Theodora, though the mystery, of course, is not how he died, but who poisoned his trifle. A murmur rippled through the room. Who would dare to murder a peer of the realm in broad daylight, and more importantly, who would be so callous as to ruin a perfectly fine trifle? And thus, with a ruined dessert and a ruined afternoon, we enter Realms Unknown, a podcast brought to you by the Bugle, all-seeing over-council of absurdity, hosted by published author and by my book comedian Alice Fraser, who each week will unlock the vault of heaven to bestow upon your eager earholes all the secret lore they could ever desire about science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, games, movies, television, and more. The time cost, about one half of one of your daily hour candles, dispensed with the precision of a dropout mentat. My companion and guide for this week's adventure, the Chani to my Paul, the Ford Prefect to my Arthur Dent, the Granny Weatherwax to my Nanny Og, will be Tom Neenan.
Hello! Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about all things fantasy and sci-fi and a bit of horror chucked in as well.
Oh, it's so good and so exciting. We're going to start, of course, with our news, a few highlights from the speculative world this week. Guy Gavriel Kay has got a new book coming out, which you know if you're a big Guy Gavriel Kay fan. If you don't know Guy Gavriel Kay, he's your favourite author's favourite author. His book, called Written in the Dark, has finally got a release date, which is the 27th of May. The Dresden Files with Jim Butcher also has an update, with Butcher announcing that he's finished his latest manuscript and sending it off to his publisher, so I assume another 3 to 5 years of waiting for that to come out. No, probably about another year, but I'm excited. It's always fun, the Dresden Files. In Game of Thrones news, there is to be yet another Game of Thrones spin-off brought to us by HBO. Will you be watching that, Tom?
I've slowly sort of not, been paying less and less attention to the various Game of Thrones iterations. Through no fault of theirs, I think it's just there's going to be a lot. I mean, if I can chuck in another bit of news, and I'm not sure if this counts in there, obviously we've just found out that James Bond has been, the ownership of James Bond has sort of, I'm not sure if it's changed, because technically it's still owned by MGM, but MGM's now owned by Amazon. So I think what people have sort of been concerned about with this is that this will be an onslaught of spin-offs, that there'll be sort of the main thing, and then of course you get the arguably diluting spin-offs that come with it, the Q series, the M, Young M, those kind of things. I don't know, I think there's some wonder and wisdom in just keeping a sort of tentpole-y, and it not having to support other weaker canvases.
I agree. It seems like the business model at the moment is to take something that everybody loves and then split it into 1,000 streams that no one can follow until people lose their original love for it.
Yes.
It's the homeopathy of fandom, essentially, just diluting in the hope that actually you're thereby making the central property more powerful.
Yes.
But actually it doesn't seem to be carried through. I think they've lost a lot of these franchises have lost a lot of goodwill from their core fan base, who then end up doing a sort of a curatorial process where they're like, this is canon and this is not canon, and I refuse to accept this James Bond or that James Bond. So I think So far, James Bond has been incredibly careful. I think the lady who has been in charge of the property, or sort of heading up the property, was the one who brought in Daniel Craig, very visionary. She is very strict on the idea that he has to be male and he has to be British to be the new James Bond. And so she has some sort of still a guiding hand, allegedly. She will maintain that guiding hand through the transition into Amazon, but I imagine that guiding hand will be meeting the hammers of Amazon pressure to squeeze every last drop of juice out of poor James Bond.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that a tech bro will be definitely up for some diverse casting there. I'm sure that's going to be. I'm sure it'll revolutionise what we think James Bond will be.
Yes, in other tech bro news, or crossing the streams news, where sci-fi and fantasy enters the real world, Meta has admitted to scraping illegal torrenting and pirating websites in order to train its AI. So where some authors and publishers have refused to let their content be scraped by AI, the AI has gotten it through pirated websites, admitting to taking 81.7 terabytes of data from various shadow and pirate websites. We'll see what the reckoning is on that, whether there's licensing or payback or any form of recompense. My sense is maybe not, but we can keep our fingers crossed.
I know this isn't a political podcast, but there aren't any laws anymore, so I say just enjoy yourself. That seems to be the vibe nowadays.
Well, there's no laws if you're fighting for your country, and
that's true. That's true.
Mila Jovovich, who is our 49-year-old born sexy yesterday archetype, she played many young ingenues and did that very well for many years. If you think about her in The Fifth Element, she was our trope on a rope a couple of weeks ago, the born sexy yesterday trope. She's in a new sci-fi film called In the Lost Lands, and that'll be coming out in 2025. Will you be watching it?
I probably will be, because I understand this is directed by her husband as well. Is this no, it's not Paul W. Yeah, Paul W.S. Anderson.
Paul W.S. Anderson. And the story is she's a sorceress traveling to the Lost Lands in search of a magical power that allows someone to transform into a werewolf. And the the male star will be Dave Bautista. So I'm in.
It sounds a bit like Monster Hunter, which I think was also directed by her husband and also starred her going to a mystical land where there were monsters, and also a bit like Resident Evil, in which she sort of travelled to sort of a dark sort of subterranean land and encountered zombies. You know what? I don't mind it. I've enjoyed all those films. So
there are three options here. One is it's very good and I'll enjoy the shit out of it. Number two, it's very bad and I'll enjoy the shit out of it.
Exactly.
Number three, it's bad but boring. Unlikely, and even so, I think I would probably enjoy the shit out of it. So I'm going to, I'm all in on that. And speaking of all in, I think our romantasy boys and girlies and others will be super into this news, which is ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses, maybe getting an adaptation, which is pretty exciting for people. I don't know how you can adapt this to screen, given that I think part of the USP of ACOTAR is its incredibly graphic sex scenes, the spice level dialed up to 1,000. So unless you have sort of fold out R-rated sections, I don't know how it can be a mass market thing. Although I guess Bridgerton stepped into that territory, but even Bridgerton is not quite as like up against the wall as ACOTAR.
Game of Thrones had some raunchiness. Is it more raunchy than Game of Thrones?
Yes. I mean,
Okay.
Game of Thrones is sort of notorious for doing sex position. I have a friend who's on the writing team for Game of Thrones and now House of a Dragon, and she said one of the things that they did was if they had any like mad exposition dumps that they had to do, they'd just get someone's tits out for it. But apparently, at the moment, A Court of Thorns and Roses. So, A Court of Thorns and Roses, I think, in a way, more than Bridgerton, more than Game of Thrones, the sex is pivotal to the character development and the plot. So I think in Game of Thrones, it's more set decor and kind of vibe infusing. Very rarely does a sex scene actually drive the plot forward. It's more a consummation of a plot or something sort of happening off to the side or something to jazz it up. But a lot of the plot of A Court of Thorns and Roses is about female empowerment, getting through trauma. Some of the relationships are abusive or exploitative, and some of them are nourishing and building. And you see that in and through the sex scenes that gets developed. So I'm not sure how they're going to bring it to the screen. There have been a few attempts to bring it. Tempo optioned the film rights in 2015, but the film adaptation sputtered out. And in 2021, Hulu said they were working on a TV adaptation, and Mass has confirmed as recently as last summer that she's still working on the script. And Variety then scrapped the plans, and Disney's rights to the series will expire in late summer 2025. But there's a lot of appetite for it. We'll have to see how it emerges.
Well, I certainly, I'm just going to launch into saying this, and I may well be like, oh, cut that out. But I thought that the sort of the crazy deregulation you have with streamers, where sort of they don't have to abide, I think, by certain FCC rules. I think they have to abide by sort of public, decency and stuff like that to various countries. I thought it would see more of a blurring of the line of things like, if you like, adult entertainment and genre television. Was I thinking there would be a really high budget thing that features like porny stuff? Possibly. Did I want that? Not really, but I thought, they might be sort of combining. You know how sometimes they'll show just like Netflix will have a fun like family sitcom where people say the F word a ton, and you're like, who's this for? I thought we were heading in that direction where you could really push the boundaries of what you could do graphically on a certain streamer. Like I say, do I want that? Not particularly, but I thought that was sort of where we're heading, but it seems like, I don't know if that's...
Well, it feels like we're at a big crossroads, a big branching of the crossroads, because in the big budget sort of Marvel-style thrillers, there's been this increasing level of everybody's hot but nobody's sexy. Where in the 90s you would often have a romance plot sort of knitted in, and there'd be sort of slightly less attractive people but who had like wild chemistry that sort of boiled off the screen. And that's sort of been scraped out of the big budget things and left to the realms of fan fiction. But then, of course, the realms of fan fiction left unattended have bubbled over into YA, into romantasy, into these increasingly graphic things, which there's clearly an appetite for. See Bridgerton, see 50 Shades of Grey, see all of these kind of there's an appetite for sexiness again, and how that will reintegrate itself into the mainstream, or whether we'll just have these kind of subgenres will be super fascinating to discover. But that brings us to our ad section for today. Ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Professor Tinkerby's Sleepotron. Trouble sleeping? Overworked? Mind buzzing like an over-caffeinated robot? Simply strap on the Sleepotron, a comfortable and only slightly cumbersome brass headgear that lulls you to sleep with the dulcet tones of a tiny built-in steam violin, engineered by a little goblin who lives on your nose. Side effects may include vivid dreams of dirigible crashes, spontaneous levitation, and an irresistible urge to duel at dawn. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Never Wrong Decision Engine. Plagued by indecision, hesitating between tea and coffee, top hat or bowler? Simply input your dilemma into the brass panel, turn the crank, and receive an authoritative decision backed by a complex system of gears and a slightly unhinged fortune-telling hamster. The Never Wrong Decision Engine, guaranteed to be correct 37% of the time.
This week's show is brought to you by dystopian environmental storytelling. Communicate unidirectionally with a protagonist trying to piece together what disaster befell mankind with dystopian environmental storytelling. A good piece of DES requires just two things: unprovoked specificity and tantalizing vagueness. DES can come in many forms. Why not try a memo to a supervisor saying something like, "We injected the monkeys with the serum this morning. What we are doing spits in the face of God." Or how about a fragment of a newspaper reading simply, "Evacuate"? Why not spice up your DES with clues to a door code or combination to a safe? The ammo is locked away. Just type in Ralph's birthday, you write, directly next to a handy breakdown of employees' birthdays with Ralph's clumsily circled. Dystopian environmental storytelling, because nothing tells a story like just going to check what's making that rattling sound on a scrap of blood-spattered paper. And nothing livens up video games like homework.
And that's your ad section for today, which brings me to our corrections and footnotes section. Yes, we're book nerds here. We're massive, massive book nerds. And we also believe in a redemptive pathway back for people who've made unforgivable errors.
I'm
There
furious.
needs to be a place for cancelled people to find their way back into the hearts of our people. And Tom, you f***ed up, man. You f***ed up.
Look, I don't want to. Look, I'm furious about this. Bunch of goddamn. Oh, okay. Do you want to say what I did wrong in inverted commas, and I'll defend myself?
All right, you swapped your Rivendell and swapped your Lothlorien. We were talking about places of rest, places of in the swimming journey of an archetypal main character. That there's a point where you rest and recover, whether it's Lothlorien or Rivendell. And you said the wrong one.
I said the wrong one.
I did not immediately kick you in the face.
Yeah.
I thought, not a big deal. We're all sort of vaguely remembering things we read when we were 15.
Yeah.
I'm always sort of loosely, haphazardly thinking about lots of stuff. Didn't bother me, apparently. Some of our readers, much bothered.
Oh, no.
So...
Bunch of goddamn... Right, okay. This is so like... actually, Williamsburg and Brooklyn have different vibes. So, like... So you wouldn't know this, but like the cinema scene in Brooklyn is way better, whereas the deep dish in Williamsburg, it's like, okay, they're basically the same place, just separated by mountains. So it feels like there's a lot of gatekeeping, and there's a lot of like, this isn't Edinburgh, this is Leith. It's like, you get it. It's the same place. I prefer Rivendell because Lothlorien is too hippie, like it's too Avatar, it's too we built everything out the trees. Whereas like I much prefer the Rivendell style. Like it feels like you could actually exist in there. It's got like decking. It feels like it's more sort of substantive. Whereas I don't want to be hanging out there with the goddamn Na'vi. And I know there aren't Na'vi in Lord of the Rings. Anyway, well done everyone. My geography isn't up to scratch when it comes to Middle Earth.
So listeners, you can decide whether you forgive Tom Neenan or whether that's the equivalent of, I'm sorry that your feelings were hurt.
It's 100% that, and I'm not even denying it.
And that is the end of our footnotes and corrections section for this week. Though, of course, we are always open to footnotes and corrections. Email us at realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com. If you would like a vaguely dismissive answer from any of our hosts or co-hosts. But that brings us to, what have you been into, other than not being corrected by randoms who have no idea what it's like to be at the coalface of podcasting?
Is this me? What have I been into?
Yay.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I'm going to go from Lord of the Rings to goddamn Star Trek fan, so this won't go wrong. I'm going to... Because I've been... So is this something new or something classic that we've been enjoying?
Either way, this week we haven't decided whether it's a new or a classic. Although I'm going a few classics, so feel free to lean either way.
Right. Okay. I'll keep my powder dry on Star Trek. I have been enjoying Lower Decks, which I'm really enjoying, and has just finished on what we watch it on Paramount Plus over here, and is really good. But okay, if we're going to do something new, I'm going to talk about the film Companion, which I just saw, which stars Jack Quaid, who's also in Lower Decks. So there's thematic sort of consistencies, and I really enjoyed Companion. I saw it at the cinema last week, and it is sci-fi. Although I sort of don't want to say too much, just because I'd encourage everyone to sort of go and see it without knowing as little as possible. Even though I think even the trailer or the poster tips too much on what's going on. There's still some surprises though. Also, I was going to say, okay, so sort of skip forward like 30 seconds if you want nothing now. But I would say it's a bit like a comedy version of Ex Machina, is what I'd say, with a near identical kind of culmination. But I think it's very funny. I really like toxic men. I like satires about toxic men, especially when they get their comeuppance. I'm less of a Neil LaBute fan, where it's like, aren't men bad? Here they are being bad, bye. And I much prefer sort of, things where there is a satirical and redemptive element to it. So I really enjoy Companion. Go in knowing as little as possible. I would say if you're a fan of White Lotus or What We Do in the Shadows, there's people there who, there's cast there who will make that worth your while. So do enjoy that.
I've heard good things about Companion, so I'll put that on my list. I'm kind of iffy on horror, but if something is funny and silly enough, I can stomach gore, which is interesting. Yes. So I don't mind a classic 80s action movie, for example. But horror where it's sort of deliberately trying to upset you, I find upsetting. Almost not even because of the thing that's upsetting, but because I feel sad that someone wanted to upset me.
Yes, yeah. I think you'd be okay. I think there's a bit of blood, but overall, I don't think all the violence I think is necessary rather than pornographic in its use.
I have been rereading After the Revolution by Robert Evans, who hosts a podcast as well, which is called Behind the Bastards, which I enjoy. That's a sort of a post-fall America apocalyptic dystopia from the perspective of a number of different characters, including a kind of a post-human assassin/soldier who's kind of dealing with being enhanced in so many ways that his brain is almost non-functional. It sort of verges into the cyberpunk of being... Oh no, how do I make it stop? It sort of verges, speaking of cyberpunk, it verges into cyberpunk of somebody being enhanced to the point where they're incapable of coping with the world without excessive drug use. And then there's a journalist character, and there's a stringer, and there's various other... there's a radicalized religious right-wing girl who sort of goes off to join the Christian militias at the front, and there's all this. It's quite fun commentary on America as it is / might become. It is overtly political if you are anti-politics in your apocalyptic dystopias. I don't know what apocalyptic dystopias you'd enjoy, but this might not be it. I've also dipped into the Heart and Mercy series by Megan Bannon, which is more romance than romantasy, but is set in a world in which people have their souls in their appendices. There's old gods and new gods, and the old gods were trapped in a sort of a parallel world that you can access via portals, and in that parallel world there are zombies. And the central romance plot is between an undertaker whose job is to preserve bodies and send them off in ships. And she is very good at her job, but it's not traditional for women to inherit undertaking businesses. And he is a warden whose job is to go and stab zombies through the appendix. So it's really fun. I enjoy it very much. If you like your necromantic heavy on the romantic, that and Gideon of the Ninth, which is science fiction, futuristic sapphic romance between a necromancer and bodyguard / soldier. So those are the things that I've been dipping into. That's After the Revolution by Robert Evans and the Heart and Mercy series by Megan Bannon. Now that brings us to Trope on a Rope, which is our favourite tropes of the week. It's in books, movies, games, that we just keep seeing. What's your trope on a rope for this week, Tom?
Today I'm going for a trope on a rope, which I didn't even realise, but it's actually featured in the artwork for this very podcast, or is at least referenced. I didn't realise that when I actually chose it, but if you look closely, it's there, and it's the epic final battle involving a city and a column of light or energy. No film is complete without a big column of light or energy. I don't know where this started. I tried to sort of track back and go, okay, what was the first column of light? I guess really you could look at something like Ghostbusters, where New York and it has the Empire State Building, and that's sort of the centre of a lot of paranormal sort of energy, which is shooting upwards and sort of it's going into the clouds and things like that. The Avengers obviously did it, where Tony Stark got sucked up into it and then spat out the other side. Probably the most upsetting version of this is in the first Superman film directed by Zack Snyder, where rather than just being a pillar of energy which represents the destruction of mankind, it's sort of this weird stop hitting yourself device where human beings are sort of levitated and then slammed into the ground. And it's absolutely terrifying and really sort of quite miserable when you stop to think about the fact that it's just in a city and millions of people are just being killed. The column of light, it's what's really interesting is of all the films, I saw Captain America Brave New World, and it's not been getting amazing reviews, but I really liked it because the actual final confrontation isn't a column of light shooting into the air, which could see the destruction of mankind. It's more personal and it's smaller. And I think that works better. I think that we got into this thing where it was an arms race, if you'll excuse the sort of pun, about the stakes getting so ridiculously high that basically the column of light got bigger. And people, we just didn't have a way of making the stakes of a finale seem huge enough. So I don't know. I think we should go back to just sort of, smaller stakes. So, if you look at things like World War Z, they ran out of money or they had to do reshoots on the sort of final act. So actually everything's incredibly small and contained. And if you make it, if you make that exciting, people will go with it. So my trope on a rope, which I'd like to see less of, but I think we all appreciate at the time, is the massive column of light shooting into the air from a city in the final battle of a usually superhero film.
One of the things that I really don't like in is disaster films where millions or thousands of people get swept away in the background while our protagonist sort of makes it to safety,
Yes.
and we're supposed to see that as a positive or a good thing. So
Yeah,
rather than like deeply upsetting. It makes me incapable of caring about the one person who's survived. Because I've kind of gone numb at the vastness of the murder behind them.
Yes. Well, it's the fallacy of the trolley problem, isn't it? Everyone thinks they'll be the one choosing who gets to be run over in the trolley problem, when actually you're the person tied to the tracks in the trolley problem. Is you're not the protagonist, you're one of the people getting swept away, is usually the truth behind those things.
Statistically, most likely.
Yeah.
My trope on a rope for this week is a sexy fight. A fight where two people are fighting and then their faces get really close and then they smooch. I have never, ever in my life had a fight where I wanted to smooch someone while I was having that fight. I think this is an artifact of camera. I think this is the nature of the sort of having two people who are very attractive having to put their faces quite close together to have a fight on camera. Possibly the idea of the sexy villain might be in there, but because of the proximity of erotica with horror, kind of the creepy sexy vibe. But I think an actual argument, an actual fight, I have never been like, shut up and kiss me. I've been like, give me 5 minutes to calm down. So if anyone feels like this trope is realistic to their life, please email us at realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com. Please keep it PG rated.
I would venture as well that I think this trope taken to its sort of logical or illogical extreme. If you've seen the film 300 Rise of the Empire, I believe it has Eva Green, and I'm not sure who her male counterpart is. Possibly Sullivan Stapleton, I'm not sure. Basically, they are fighting while having sex, is the sort of is the scene, and it's sort of baffling to watch, but also quite impressive. So yeah, there's that sort of it taken to its zenith, I guess.
And that brings us to this week's subgenre submarine, where we deep dive into one of the fantastical subgenres of sci-fi or fantasy. And I'm not sure, genuinely, whether this one is sci-fi or fantasy. Last week we did cyberpunk, and we mentioned that it is occasionally mixed up with steampunk. So this week we're going to talk about steampunk, which is a subgenre of science fiction and fantasy. Depending on who's writing it, might lean more sci-fi or more fantasy. It combines sort of 19th century industrial steam-powered technology with elements of Victorian-era aesthetics and futuristic innovations. Compared with cyberpunk, it's often much more light-hearted and whimsical, though it's not absent its satire or darker themes. It often features things like airships, clockwork mechanisms, brass goggles, elaborate retro-futuristic inventions, sort of a mingling between the magical and the technological. It's inspired by, it's probably all fan fiction about the works of authors like Jules Verne or H.G. Wells. You imagine an alternate history where steam remained the dominant source of power rather than electricity or modern technology, although more recent steampunks often have a kind of an electrical or magical element. Often it's that electricity is more powerful but less predictable than steam, which is a fun little thing. Visually, it is incredibly popular. It's known for its mix of elegant Victorian fashion, corsets, waistcoats, top hats, stripy stockings, monocles, and mechanical accessories with cogs, gears, intricate machinery. Are you interested in steampunk at all, Tom?
Yeah, well, okay. I'm going scorched earth here. You've annoyed me. Not you, but the you outside have annoyed me with the Lothlorien thing. So I would say, things I've enjoyed. Bioshock is definitely steampunk. A game called Dishonored that a friend of mine bought me and said you'd really enjoy this, and he was absolutely correct. I really enjoyed Dishonored. I thought that was excellent. I've mentioned before, I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, and there are episodes like Deep Breath and The Girl in the Fireplace, which lean really heavily on a very strong steampunk aesthetic as well. So I'd say from that point of view, it's sort of inevitable that there are some elements of steampunk that I've really enjoyed. Caveat to that, people who sort of just enjoy steampunk for the sort of the way it looks, grow up, guys. I want you to goddamn grow up. Be kinky. That's what I want. Like, you're almost there. You've got the corsets, and you've got the goggles, and you've got maybe some like breathing constriction, like you've got some kind of mask or something as well. Just go the whole hog. Like, no one's judging. You're almost there. So just do that, please, because all I'm thinking is like the weird thing where Zeppelins are a really big thing, but then it's I've got a bee in my bonnet now. Do I believe what I'm saying? Not at all. My blood's running hot, and I'm saying, yeah. I think because a lot of people think I like steampunk aesthetic. Sometimes I wear like a shirt and a waistcoat, and it's like not particularly. But yeah, so I'd say take your goggles off your top hat, because that's usually what happens, isn't it? People sort of do that, and that's the look.
Goggles on a top hat.
Goggles on a top hat.
Pedal-powered vibrator. Just go
exactly.
hard.
And just enjoy. Just go all out. What about yourself, Alice? Are you a fan?
I enjoy steampunk. Yes, I think it's fun. I think it's lighthearted. I think it's whimsical. I can get a bit shut of it, particularly on the more cutesy end, the anime end of steampunk, which verges onto kind of Lolita aesthetics.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I'm gonna get myself a caveat.
Lolita kind of steampunk thing. It doesn't entirely float my boat, but I enjoyed Mortal Engines, which is YA if you want a young friendly version of steampunk. Cinder Spires by Jim Butcher, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, obviously Bioshock Infinite, Howl's Moving Castle. A less good version would be Wild Wild West. There's Naomi Novik's Temeraire series, which is steampunk with dragons, but the dragons are essentially like the battleships of the era. So you have Master and Commander type vibes with that. The Dragons of Dorcastle by Jack Campbell is another dragony steampunk crossover. And then the Tenserate series by Neon Yang, which I can highly recommend, being it's sort of steampunk but with oriental, kind of Southeast Asian, what they call silk punk vibes, if you want to kind of expand your understanding of the genre and maybe take it out of that really cliched Victorian monocle vibe. If you want the other side of the Opium War, try the Tenserate series by Neon Yang. If you have any steampunk recommendations as well, email us at realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com.
I'm sorry, guys. I came in hot. I realise that now. I came in hot. Listeners,
you know what you need to do is let off some steam.
No! Hellboy steampunk.
Hellboy is borderline steampunk, I would say. That's got certainly a bunch of steampunk aesthetic in it.
All right, please don't write in that you hate me, because I just, I'm sorry, guys.
And that brings us to our floating feature, The Minds of talking about books or shows that we love that may not have necessarily aged well. And mine this week is The Stainless Steel Rat. Harry Harrison wrote the Stainless Steel Rat series, which is a satirical space opera. The anti-hero is James Bolivar de Gris, who goes by many aliases, including Slippery Jim and the Stainless Steel Rat. He's a futuristic con man. He's a rascal. He's like James Bond, but with an actual sense of humor. It's really fun. It is very of its time, but I think the ness of it is the kind of part of the character, and I don't think it's meant to be glamorized or valorized. I think you're meant to see the things that James Bolivar de Gris does wrong as wrong, and they're funny. So I can forgive it because it is really funny, and I don't think you're meant to want to be Slippery Jim. I think you're meant to enjoy his depravities and stupidities and is essentially his good heart under all of the con man thing. If you like Han Solo, if you like James Bond, if you like something that is funny and witty and satirical and has a heart of gold, I highly recommend the Stainless Steel Rat series. Tom?
Yes, sorry to a resident Doctor Who fan, so I have to bring it up at every opportunity. We recently lost in the classic Doctor Who fan community an actor called Christopher Benjamin, who is very famous for playing a character called Henry Gordon Jago in a Doctor Who story called The Talons of Weng Chiang. If you haven't heard of that, you know where this is going anyway. Set in Victorian London with a slight steampunk kind of element, I guess, and it involves the sort of devious character of Lee Sen Chang, who's like a magician and music hall performer. And if you know anything about 70s TV, you know that Lee Sen Chang is not played by a Chinese actor. He's played by an actor called John Bennett, who wears face-augmenting makeup, and it is bad. And as a child, I remember I watched this, and I think Lee Sen Chang is quite a well-written character. He's sort of very flawed, but I think there's a decent amount of sort of depth given to him, but all of that is erased because he isn't played by a Chinese actor. And I think I was willing to give Doctor Who a pass on this, only I saw recently on TikTok someone had videoed a talk by David Walliams where he presented a sketch, and this was I think a talk that happened this year or last year, in which he played a Japanese schoolgirl, and I said that, in my head I went, no, unacceptable, but then in my head I was also giving this a pass, and I kind of think that I have to sort of square everything and sort of go, have people of the race playing the characters of the race, and I think that for the most part, I don't mind if someone from Kazakhstan plays someone from Tajikistan. We all have to, or an Irish person plays an English person or whatever. But for the most part.
Yeah, I still don't know where I stand on that, because, for example, there was this much applauded version of The King and I, in which the King of Siam was played by Ken Watanabe.
Right.
And I feel like, well, okay, but he's the King of Siam.
Right, okay,
are we going, it's okay as long as it's vaguely Oriental? Or are we saying we need the specific... Because then at what point does acting kind of take a backseat to someone just being themselves? I genuinely don't know how I feel about it. I know where I feel uncomfortable, but that's just my subjective kind of, that makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm not sure if there's an underlying principle here that needs to be kind of unpicked and laid out, so that then when something does make you uncomfortable, you're like, is this reasonable? Because my discomfort cannot be the measure of whether something's sort of acceptable. So I do think this deserves more thinking.
Definitely. All I would say is watch. You have the option of watching The Talons of Weng Chiang, and I think that one. I think everyone can sort of draw the line and go, oh, that's where it's uncomfortable.
Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Chrono Latte 3000. Tired of waiting in line for your overpriced morning caffeine? The Chrono Latte 3000 doesn't just brew your coffee, it rewinds time so you've already received your coffee. Powered by pre-fall Russian AI, the Chrono Latte 3000 will deliver hot black coffee to the back of your throat with only a small side of disinformation in exchange for all of your private data, and control of your bowel movements are up to 5 years. Warning, excessive use may cause paradoxes, headache, shitting forever, or sudden existential crises. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Instant Moustache Dispenser. Nothing says respectable like a well-groomed moustache. With the press of a button, this device deploys a perfectly waxed moustache onto your face or buttocks, ensuring instant credibility in business meetings, duels, and train heists. Are you tired of life's exhausting excesses? Are you drowning in overindulgence? Have you been toppled by tea cakes? Introducing Professor Puddlewick's patented Wateromaton, the revolutionary beverage experience that delivers precisely half a glass of water to you through a series of complex pneumatic tubes. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Realms Unknown. 3 things for you to take away and explore the moment you tear out your earbuds and rejoin the world. Head to your nearest and dearest cinema, watch Tom's film recommendation, Companion. If you're fancying some reading material, look up my recommendations, After the Revolution from Robert Evans, for some post-American, post-apocalypse podcaster/writer action. I feel like as a podcaster/writer by my book, you ought to check out other podcaster/writers' books and maybe buy them. Strap on your brass goggles and take a deep dive into the world of steampunk. To recap all of the recommendations, take a look in our episode description or go to our bookshop reading list in your app of choice if you have any recommendations for us. Leave us a comment on YouTube or send us a voice note via email to realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com. Tom, have you got anything to plug? TomNeenanArt.BigCartel.com. I'm hawking some genre and sci-fi based artwork, some prints and some originals, and it'd be lovely if you wanted to treat yourself to one of those. That's what I'm sort of plugging at the minute. Primarily, I've got a Feathers McGraw print and I've got a Severance print that I have. I love the Severance print. I'm really enjoying that.
Thank you very much.
Tom Neenan, go buy some of his art for just twice the price of a single artwork. He'll let you take it as an art heist, where he'll take it to a place and turn his back on it so you can sneak in and sneak away with it and feel the thrill. Also, you do have to pay for it in advance. But tomneenan.com. And you can find me online at patreon.com/Alice Fraser. Join me. We do writers' meetings by Zoom twice a week. If you sign up at the Patreon, you get the calendar and you can just join us on the Zoom there. If you're sort of worried about me, you can just keep your camera off and I won't hassle you, and you can experience the writers' meeting without having to engage in the writers' meeting. Also, I'm doing a writers' retreat in Switzerland. If you're the opposite end of that writers' meeting spectrum and are like, oh, why can't I smell Alice while I'm doing the writing? Come to Switzerland. Come to Switzerland with me. Expression of interest forms are up on my linktree/Alice Fraser. There's just one more date of my tour in the UK of A Passion for Passion. It's in London. It's on the 1st of March. If you've been wanting to see the show, A Passion for Passion, about the book, A Passion for Passion, come to London, the Clapham Omnibus Theatre on the 1st of March. Please do. Tickets are selling fast. This is a Bugle podcast, an Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.